Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is Jon Ruzek and I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks and your host today. Hey, thanks everyone for taking time out of your noon hour if you're here in the Central Time Zone to join us. And also if you're in Minnesota, you're freezing your bones off right now. We have some exciting things just down the road. The big game, football game is happening. And unfortunately, the Philadelphia Eagles are practicing here at our facilities. So we're dealing with that. So, but today we're not talking football. We're going to talk about social media for career advancement and the job search. And we want to make this pretty informal and have fun with it. So we'll start in just a few minutes before some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, where we're having conversations with folks about career life and learning topics. We started over 3 years ago, and since then we've had over 8,000 day of attendees and over 20,000 YouTube views of these webinars. Thank you so much. The support of our Alumni Association members does make things like this possible. And if you've benefited from these webinars or really like it or like to support career and professional development, consider being an Alumni Association member today. Just visit umnalumni.org/membership. One other cool way that you can help support alumni entrepreneurs and makers is that we have a new website, the Minnesota Alumni Market, mnalumnimarket.com, I believe it is. And we are actually down in downtown Minneapolis through the Super Bowl festivities. And you can find our products from the Minnesota Alumni Market on the Nicollet Mall between the Local and Barrio, in the heart of festivities for the big game, and that's in the Hippie Feet Warming House. So check that out if you're downtown today or tomorrow or Sunday. Have some great webinars coming up in February. Shatter Your Business Ceiling on the 13th, Effective Team Building and Management on the 22nd, and then Polarity Dynamics in Ourselves and in the Workplace. If you're into Jungian psychology, that's going to be a really fun deep dive there. And, since this is a webinar about social media, if you're on your preferred platform, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever, take a photo, drop a note, use hashtag UMN alumni, and let's have fun with it. Let's keep the conversation going online. Before we get started, just a few GoToWebinar housekeeping items. You've joined the presentation listening to your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your speakers, this could be caused by having multiple applications open or being on a wireless signal perhaps. So close down anything you don't need, maybe move to a hardwired connection if you're having issues. Questions will be welcome, and you can submit them in the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll try to monitor them along the way. I'm both presenting and monitoring Q&A, so I will do my best to try to get your questions addressed when that time comes. And today's presenter is me. Usually I pitch it to somebody else at this time, but I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks for the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. I work on these, producing these career webinars, also work with some of our corporate alumni networks, and also we'll be rolling out in February an online platform that's going to be connecting students to alums and alums to alums regarding career help items as well. So that's kind of it for me, but today, both online and in person with me, I have two great alums who are helping me. First, joining me in McNamara Alumni Center today is Profit Idowu, who's an account supervisor with Fallon and also a grad of the College Education and Human Development from 2014. Welcome, Profit.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
And joining us on the phone today is Johnna Mitich, who is in talent acquisition for Boston Scientific and is a 2013 grad from the College of Liberal Arts. Welcome, Johnna.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're just going to, I'm going to go through my presentation deck today And I'll just say, kind of as a start, I do not profess to be the expert in all things social media. And as you'll hear probably from both our panelists and people online, is that people relate to social media channels in a variety of different ways. And there isn't a right way or a wrong way. Just take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have framed up the presentation today with some do's and don'ts. Again, it's going to make sense for each individual. These are just some of the things that I've learned along the way, and would like to share with our alumni, students, and friends today. And so this first slide really just kind of shows that I'm kind of an old timer when it comes to the internet and social media, because when I graduated from college, email was just in its infancy. The internet had just come on board, and the rise of YouTube and other social channels has really made things interesting. So hopefully I have a little bit of long-term perspective, but what I'm really excited about Profit and Johnna's perspective is from a more recent alum standpoint, because how they relate to their social channels is obviously might be a little bit different than how I do. So our first do, I'd say do social listening. Oftentimes we use the term social listening in regards to how businesses or corporations monitor social channels to figure out user behaviors and things like that. Or, if you write about having to get, if you do a post about, wanting cold medicine, suddenly your ads start being more targeted from Walgreens and things like that. But what I would say across a variety of platforms is take that social listening concept and apply it to the companies, organizations, recruiters, thought leaders that you want to follow. And I throw up Best Buy here as an example, as far as a company that's visible across a variety of different platforms, but there's a variety of ways that you can engage, from a LinkedIn company page to using the LinkedIn alumni finder to search for, in this case, in the bottom left, U of M alums. If you come across particular recruiters, such as our friend Monica, you can, by visiting her public LinkedIn profile, can see some of the things that she's commenting on, she's liking, following Twitter accounts, follow Instagram feeds or stories, as far as what the company's putting out there. Because having that type of information and background, can help you find others who can maybe help you in that informational interview phase, or help prep you before interviews, can maybe give you a better understanding of that organization, about what they're promoting, what's important to them, what are the types of things that they're following and pushing out. So if like a certain organization has a real bent on corporate social responsibility, you might be able to learn a little bit more of that through social channels. And I'll just kind of kick it over to our two panelists. What types of social channels have you kind of listened into or been helpful for you along the way? And I'll maybe kick it over to Johnna first on that one.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Twitter has just become such an easy way to not only get news, but then get information on companies, trends in the industries that you're passionate about. And I think as a candidate, it helps you build so much credibility with a company the more that you know about it. You can set up alerts on your Twitter and other social media channels, so that whenever anybody tweets, whenever Boston Scientific tweets, I get a notification. Whenever there's anything going on in the med device industry, I get a notification, and you can set that up. And same deal when we post a job. If somebody's getting those alerts, they're going to know, and they're going to be a lot quicker to apply than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Profit, what about you?
Going off of what Johnna said, I think for me, a nice social channel that I think would be helpful for a lot of young aspiring professionals is this podcast that I really love to follow, called EntreLeadership. Basically, their whole goal. It's a Dave Ramsey kind of solution podcast, but they inspire small businesses and then business leaders alike to help their teams profits and also organizations grow. So you could have a whole bunch of inspirational content just coming straight through your social media feed. And for me, I actually like to optimize my drive time by listening to that podcast on the way in. But, you know, if you're looking for a little motivational Monday tweet or something like that to post out, that is a great resource and channel to kind of hone in on to see what all the leading industry business professionals are doing, what they're talking about, and kind of how to make the most out of your quarters in the year. And then also, as far as listening as well, I think it's a good thing for your own personal brand to kind of look at what some of the business professionals are talking about and, you know, what kind of things are they tweeting. It's one thing nowadays to kind of understand that you post online, you want to make sure it's congruent with who you are. Authenticity is, I think, one of the most salient traits in 2018. And it's something that I think you should make sure to mirror in all parts of life, not just online, but in the physical. And the link to the organization that I follow is just, if you search in the App Store or if you type in on Twitter, Entree Leadership, that is the podcast that I mentioned.
Entree Leadership. Thanks everyone for your questions on that. That sounds like a good resource. And you know, one other, as far as a variety of other platforms, admittedly, I probably use Instagram more for personal purposes, and admittedly, I'm not on Snapchat, so I don't profess to know a lot about Snapchat. But at least with some of the career resources that I've read about those two platforms, is that, you know, maybe if you're more in a design field or something where through the stories aspect of Instagram or Snap Stories, that you can, you know, almost do like a visual, like I've heard visual resumes, visual cover letters. You know, sometimes people have, there's one example I'd read a while back where someone had created a geo filter through Snapchat that was targeted at the employer that they wanted to get in front of, and that did get the employer's attention. But you know, just kind of, I think whatever the platform, there's, you know, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, think about how those platforms can help tell your story, because each one will, I think, provide opportunities to share those types of things. All right, well, I'm going to go on to the next one. The first don't, I would say, is don't be a troll. And what I say by that is, like, especially on social, and this is, we're going to talk a little bit down the road, is figuring, you know, what platforms and what, you know, how you're going to approach each platform. But kind of a general rule of thumb, you know, I think we're all familiar with it as far as on different platforms. We know the people who pick fights, who maybe spam, you know, maybe make a connection and then, you know, solicit you, you know, 2 minutes later. What I would say is that, you know, just be aware, depending on the platform, depending on your privacy settings, the things that you put out there are fodder for potential employers. A lot of HR folks will say, like, oh, we don't check social media. But then if you also talk to them offline, a lot of them do say that they check social media. And this is one infographic from the Daily Muse that talks about the percentage of employers that do admit to checking candidates. I do think it's a little bit higher. So yeah, just remember what your you know, public behavior is, especially if you have public accounts. There's an example a few years ago, I won't give the exact platform, but it was more in a group chat setting where somebody was expressing frustration about the job search and frustration about how a certain company or organization wouldn't hire him or her, but then in the same breath kind of did a whole laundry list of why that organization was, like, basically the worst thing ever. And so if I was either at that organization that person was trying to get into, or another recruiter, that type of, you know, online behavior isn't necessarily going to endear you to recruiters down the road. And I know, Johnna, you had mentioned you've seen some examples of people making mistakes online. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so obviously everyone knows about that election that we had a little bit ago, and it really revved up quite a bit of candidate feelings on social media and public feelings that were shared, and obviously everybody is entitled to their own feelings, but the unfortunate thing is that with a lot of candidates, they would be, they'd come off as very aggressive, and you want to present your best self, and think about how you show up, and how you're showing up online is the exact same how they're viewing you in person or over the phone. And so whatever your words are saying, they're going to assume that that's the kind of person that you are. And so we saw a number of negative, both sides, like both parties of negative posts, and it was rough. I usually say, like, the best way to even respond to someone else that's being negative on your post is to just kill them with kindness. That if you didn't make a negative post, if you weren't being a troll, but if somebody's trolling you, don't be a troll back, because that's public too. When I've gotten people that are trolling me about the Gophers, I'll usually say, I'll look at their profile, I might see that they're a data analyst, and I'll say, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter where you graduated from. I have a data analyst job for you if you want it. So kill them with kindness.
That's a good suggestion.
And just to pair off what Johnna says, I think with social media, for some reason, like, there's this nature or land that you enter where it gives people the leeway to kind of act in a persona that they normally don't act, whether it's a funny one or just trying to, be rude. Some people might call this Twitter fingers, for example. And I think you should just know your audience. If you're a tattoo artist, for example, and art and expression and self, expression is something that you are in, like, if that's your field, your actions will probably map to that. But if you are potentially in a corporate space, or if you're in a working professional, you definitely want to make sure that your actions map to how you speak and how you, communicate online. To kind of tackle some of these questions that I've seen coming in, which is interesting. If you don't have a social presence online, I think as long as your work and your resume can speak to the type of work you're doing, social media might not even be a factor in your job. So you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. But I would say have a working knowledge of it. You make sure that you're still staying ahead of the curve, knowing what the trends are, knowing how these tools are used in the workplace, and that will definitely, set you, I think, apart from the rest. Because if you have a stance on how you interact with social, like for me, we live in such an interconnected world nowadays. People think that if I update my Facebook, that will tell everyone in my network what I'm doing. Everyone's living their own lives, and not everyone is monitoring your pages. So you don't necessarily need to post 3 times a day, 1 day a week.
Sure.
As long as it serves your purpose, I think that you can have a limited presence on social media, but be on it and still be an effective professional.
Yeah. And the point of this slide isn't that we should be devoid of any opinions or takes or be passionate about the things that concern us in life, because I mean, your profession could be public affairs, you could be into politics, or it's just something, whether it's the Gophers or a certain political party or a certain cause, you might be passionate about that. I think social media provides a great opportunity for dialogue, and we'll kind of talk about that later. It's just kind of more of the reminder of think about it like if you were standing up in a room of 200 people, would you be saying or phrasing the same types of things that maybe some people just willy-nilly tweet off the cuff? And that goes into our next slide as far as do take ownership of your social self. And what I mean by your social self is just kind of taking that inventory of what social media channels do you want to invest in or not invest in, as far as whether it's creating an account or like, oh, I really should go back and update that LinkedIn profile of mine. What are more public facing accounts? What are things that you maybe make more private that's just open to family or friends or specific folks? What are social media accounts that are maybe more of your personal accounts? Some of you may have more Facebook accounts that aren't public, that you just have your inner network of family and friends. And then there's other things like LinkedIn or Twitter, where those can definitely be more public facing, more professional facing. Personally myself, probably more from a professional standpoint, leverage more LinkedIn and Twitter, both within the alumni relations and higher ed world. But Johnna, what platforms have you kind of maybe from a professional standpoint invested in, or how you've made that, how you've distinguished those, kind of your public private?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish that. Certainly some people, depending on their career path, like kind of morphs. My significant other is in media. Sometimes, the profession kind of morphs into his personal world. But whereas with me, it's so much more important for me to have a really professional presence on LinkedIn because of the amount of candidate flow that is looking at my LinkedIn, that our leaders are looking at my LinkedIn. That means having a professional photo, not having a picture with my cats, not having a picture from like the late 90s, or whatever, that it's up to date and that I'm showing the most things that I'm interested in. I think that's been huge for me. That's how I've been able to get connected with a lot of people that I've been interested in talking to, is if I am following and joining some of the groups that I'm interested in, that I want to know more about. I think that joining the Minnesota Alumni Association LinkedIn group, I'll give a plug for it, has been great for me to connect with people that maybe I went to school around the same time with, but I never met, that are doing some of the same work I'm doing and have great ideas.
And I'll give a shameless plug that we're actually going to be rolling out a online platform, hopefully in the latter part of February here, that's going to allow people to sync their LinkedIn profiles, but then really drill down to, you'll be able to see the other alumni who have said, like, I'm willing to do an informational interview, I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z. And you could either search kind of across the entire U. If you want to just limit it to people who say CLA, you can do that. So stay tuned, everyone, alumni, students out there, stay tuned for that, because that is coming down the road. All right, I'm gonna keep on moving on. This is from LinkedIn. John, you're the boss of your account. And I throw that up there because that's what it shows me when I log into my privacy settings. And so I will say to folks out there, don't ignore your privacy settings. That is something that you at least want to spend some time on with the different platforms you're on, because they vary very differently across different platforms. And oftentimes they can either add or subtract different features. And so sometimes the features they add are great, and it's something that you can use to further customize your privacy. Other things, like a couple weeks ago, there's a thing going around on LinkedIn where they suddenly, since they've been bought out by Microsoft, there is this kind of behind the scenes feature where you could sync your resume up to LinkedIn, but then it was a default setting to basically LinkedIn then had the right to kind of share your resume template. And so long story short, there's now a way on the back end to turn that off. Problem is people have to go in to turn it off. I would say depending on the platforms that you're on, maybe take a once, twice a year inventory of those settings. Or if there's just certain things with the user experience that are happening on those platforms, go into your privacy settings, see if you can, get less third-party, notifications or ads or things like that. Obviously, there's a trade-off with a lot of these free platforms. Of course, there's going to be advertisement, but those types of things have been very valuable for me. Do either of our panelists have any thoughts on privacy settings or things that have worked or not worked for them?
Yeah, I'll start off since Johnna's been kind of the at-bat for the past couple questions. I think for me, what's really good is understanding that you kind of like the slide says, you're the boss of your account. And just because you have a social media account doesn't mean it's open field for everyone to just post anything willy-nilly or tag you in any kind of tweet or post. So for me, especially on Facebook, I have a privacy setting where whatever's on my wall, which is for me, I only keep that for the content that I want to show up. Everything else that I get tagged in, I have to review before it gets placed on my page. That doesn't mean that content can't live elsewhere or anything like that, but just on my specific pages, I just make sure that I curate it to the specific use that, I have all of my social channels telling a specific story and also a representation of how I want to show up in the world. So privacy settings for me are definitely my best friend, and I'm glad that, these organizations that are now becoming somewhat semi-governments and, governing people are now putting more effective measures in place. So yeah, I'll pass it off to Johnna.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a lot of times when we talk about privacy settings, we think more of like how we can be more private. But what I've kind of seen a lot with people that are looking for jobs is they almost make the mistake of on their LinkedIn profile only like being completely private. And so, a recruiter or somebody that works for that company might not be able to see that you're looking at them. And I get a notification when somebody looks at me, and I can see who they are, what they do, what they're interested in. And so sometimes when you're looking for a job, it's better to open yourself up, especially on LinkedIn. But I kind of have a unique platform that I wanted to share that I figured out recently to watch out for, and that's Venmo. I don't know if you guys use Venmo, but that's been starting to get huge the way that our world changes in sending money. And we actually had a couple candidates last month who were sharing inappropriate things that maybe they did or didn't pay for, but they thought of it as a joke, but saying, I paid my friend Mike for blah, blah, and it's public. And you can see that. And so if, even if a recruiter has called you and their number's in your, in the app, and your number's in there too, it'll show up as someone in their network. So just watching what you're saying you're paying for, and there is an option on Venmo to be private or to just be like for the person you're paying.
That's a very good point. Yeah, because I remember doing jokes like writing physical checks and writing some joke in the memo field. It sounds like that's basically the online version of that now.
Yep, exactly.
Good to know. Okay, I'm going to go through probably some of these next few slides a little quick, just so we save a lot of time for Q&A, because we already have some good questions lined up, and some of these are pretty straightforward too. What I'd say, definitely take time to search yourself. And what I mean by that is go to Google, go to Bing, go to your preferred search engine and search basically your name. Search your name plus employer. See what comes up. See what comes up in the listing. See what comes up in the image search. And I just use a pedestrian example, former WCCO news anchor Don Shelby, just because it's a safe one, because most people in Minnesota know who Don Shelby is. And then, when I did an image search of Don Shelby, it's mostly a lot of CCO stuff and some of his stuff from when he retired and has grown his hair long too. So he's looking great. But I just say that, especially with image searches, things like that, that ties back to your privacy settings. So thus, if you do have, recruiters or employers who are looking, they might be kind of going down the line as far as looking at some of those things. And one tip that I read online, it was from Dave Ryan, who's a principal at Ryan Search and Consulting. He recommended search variations of your names in previous employers or organizations you've been a part of, because that might bring up different images, searches as well. Also, I'd say don't like without looking. And I give a variety of different examples as far as both LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. Depending on the platform, depending on how you set your privacy settings, especially nowadays, like the likes, don't necessarily, if you like something, it just doesn't stay to your timeline. Depending on the platform, like, for example, Bill Gates' Twitter account, I can see the 37 things that he's liked over the time. That can be a really good thing, as far as sometimes if you're like looking at someone who's a recruiter and seeing the types of content that he or she is sharing, that can be valuable kind of from that social listening standpoint. But then vice versa, people can kind of search you too in that sense, or possibly look at activity. And if you're sharing, professional content or things that really interest you in the realm of the fields that you're interested in, that can be a really great way for somebody to see a window into your interests and the ways you're trying to be a thought leader in your areas. So I just kind of say that as far as just a helpful tip, just because sometimes, it used to be like you could like a tweet and it doesn't necessarily show up in the timeline. Well, now it does. So it's like, you just have to keep that in mind. Do keep working at it. And what I say as far as social media platforms is that I think so often people get exasperated or tired, as far as like they feel like they have to create some online presence magically overnight and have 10 zillion followers and, craft every perfect piece of content. It's not going to happen. It is a long-term game, not a short-term game. And that goes back to the platforms that you want to invest in, as far as the time that you're going to put into. Maybe you're more in a visual field, and having a presence on Pinterest and Instagram is going to be way more valuable than LinkedIn. Then go forth and do that. But what I really want to encourage everyone is set aside that time, whether it's, 30 minutes a week, something like that, to go in and add an element to your LinkedIn profile. You can use content management systems like Hootsuite to, schedule tweets in advance. So, if you're not tied to your phone all the time, you can, still be purposeful in putting out professional content. Johnna had mentioned LinkedIn groups and, posting on that. Just be purposeful about the work that you're putting into it, because the more interaction that you're putting into things, kind of the more you'll grow your network, and you'll have that network of people before you need it, before you start saying like, oh, I want to go do that career change, or, oh, I just got laid off, I need to find that other job. If you've kind of laid down the tracks as far as building up those networks and different platforms, it's more easy to call upon those networks. Yeah. Profit, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, quick note about that. I think that's the big, if there's one thing I think you could take out of this social media webinar today, would be that you should invest in the relationships that you're building, not just online, but in person too. After you add that person on LinkedIn, how are you following up with them? How are you staying in touch with their life and how they're doing? Because like John said, there'll be one day in your career or something down the line where you might need to reach out to them. And then, you reach out and they're going to ask like, oh, who are you? We only met this one time. And they won't be as likely to, support you. But if you make it a genuine interaction, that goes a long way. And I think us as human beings, with all the negativity in the world that's out nowadays, I think doing something with intention would definitely serve you in the long run. And also, Matt, whether you have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, like, what is the purpose for each channel that you have for you? You don't need to necessarily have a Tumblr or a Twitter or anything. But if you're like, I only want to have a LinkedIn and a Facebook, and you stick to those two, cool. And then you work at those. So you make sure that it, continues to hone and reflect the organization and person that you want it to be. So.
Mm-hmm. Johnna, what about you? I know you have a very good online presence as well.
I mean, I always try to think about it like dating. That, you know, you wouldn't go up to a nice guy or girl at a bar and just not say anything to them and expect them to want to go out with you. It's all about engagement. That's how I feel with your own presence, whether it's to get a job or if you're trying to get sales, you're trying to get stuff for your brand. You have to go out and grab those people and give them a reason to follow you and figure out why would they want to be connected to you, because it wouldn't just be because you're only sharing links that are, you know, by other people. It might be because you're writing your own material and you're sharing your thoughts around the same things that people are passionate about. So I just think thinking about it like dating sometimes makes it give a little less pressure because it's relatable and you can really see that, wow, that's right. If I did go up to somebody at a bar and didn't say anything, they probably wouldn't want to hang out with me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love if metaphor is the right word, analogy. I like the examples you're bringing up. All right, I'm going to go through these next slides very quick, and then we'll get to Q&A and involve our panelists even more. Johnna touched on this before. Don't neglect your profile photos. There's lots of info out there as far as, especially on LinkedIn. If you have a profile photo, it's 11 times more likely to be viewed. Same thing with like Twitter. So, you know, don't put up that prom picture. Don't, unless you're like a hunting guide, don't have a pictures with firearms or beer or things like that. You know, find a photo, and you don't have to have it professionally done. I'm a big advocate for get into some natural light, get someone with a smartphone that can take a high res picture, you know, crop it up kind of mid chest up, have an expression, a smile that you are comfortable with, and that's what works. You know, and crop it, you know, for that particular platform. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. And the kind of that vanity link there, that was a Prezi presentation by a former colleague down at the University of Minnesota Rochester, Karna Bergstrom, but it's still live and has some good suggestions about profile photos. And don't neglect your account. I use this from Twitter. It's not probably a real account. It's maybe one of the Russian bots, but it just shows like, I only throw that up there just as far as like, have you ever visited maybe someone's Twitter account or LinkedIn, and the last thing that they ever put up was from 2013, or their LinkedIn is from 7 jobs ago, you know, and it's clearly, you know, not being tended to. I think those are the types of things where oftentimes those are just the little things that people, I think, can work on as far as just keeping things fresh, updated. So thus, if somebody, you know, let's say you're not maybe active on Twitter, you know, make sure you have that a link to your LinkedIn profile or your preferred blog or your preferred business account so people can find you. I think sometimes, especially jumping across different social platforms, we don't leave the breadcrumbs for people to find us or find the things that we want to feature about ourselves. And, you know, that goes back to kind of figuring out what are the platforms you want to be on, because if it's a platform, let's say like Pinterest, where maybe you were on it before and now it really doesn't do anything for you, you know, survey says, you know, delete your account possibly or sundown it. Again, you don't have to be on every platform. So definitely, if there are platforms over time that you haven't had value in, consider whether you want to stay on those. And the next Profit perfectly touched on it, and Johnna also kind of mentioned it as well, is remember, social media, probably at the heart of it, should be social, interacting with other people, and, you know, not necessarily always pushing out, you know, mindless content, but literally interacting with folks. And I think those are really great ways I've found through LinkedIn or Twitter, or even, you know, liking someone's content on Instagram staying on the radar, being social. Those things, while they might not magically get you a job, tomorrow, kind of those tiny acts on social media do add up over time, and I think can build you up as, let's say you interact a lot with people in the graphic design world. You can become, a thought leader or somebody that people, follow in those disciplines if you kind of put that investment in it. And you can be strategic about that as well. And then lastly, I say don't think that social media is real life. There is an opportunity, and I think Profit touched on it before, where, if you have a social media connection, if you're able, whether in person or by phone, to, take that person out to coffee, get to know them in person. If it's maybe something where you have a personal connection with someone, but maybe you're not linked in with, link in with them, just so then down the road, as you're, posting content or maybe seeking career advice, you can stay on their radar as well. But actually, a while back, Profit did, he's given some words of advice, I think, to juniors or seniors here. And one of the things, I'm going to quote what he had given us before, is that success doesn't always look like an immediate job or internship offer or what your friends post on social media about their lives. And I think that's the one thing I often, when I talk with people about social media, is that, and it's human nature. It's like we compare ourselves against somebody else, or I'm doing it wrong, or, what they're posting online is like the most perfect thing in the world. And with this slide, I'm just here to also reinforce that, social media is a filtered version of ourselves. Hopefully it's as authentic as it can possibly be, but don't use social to, prematurely judge yourself or, get down in the dumps about where you may or may not be in a career. And in Profit, I don't know, I really love that quote that you had supplied before, but I don't know if you have any other thoughts in that realm.
Yeah. No, I think just with each thing that goes out or tweet, what's funny is, I think it was Dan Malin who is working with Equals3 and used to be like a partner over at Magnet 360. He says whenever a client asks me to make a business decision on their behalf, or make some executive call, I have to gut check with my team and myself and say, if this decision was to be on the front of the Star Tribune in the morning, would I be proud of it?
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at things through that lens, it's like, wow, I maybe should not post that, or make that decision or do that thing. And you'd only want the things that you're proud of, because when you do grab the paper and you do see yourself in it, it should be one of the best feelings you ever have in life. Like, oh, wow, like this is me in the paper, doing something for the community or for my family. So I think just take a real human approach to everything you do and you'll be fine.
Johnna, do you have any additional thoughts?
I totally agree. The only thing I would also add is I think there's a stigma around social media where people do think of it as real life. And so then they also think, well, maybe I would be a creep if I'm connecting with this person. They don't know me. This is weird. How can I reach out to them? Why would they want to connect with me? And I think just to stop thinking that way. Obviously there are creeps that are out there, but don't think of it as stalking or creeping. You are trying to prepare yourself for an interview, or you are trying to make connections to just further your network or your emotional intelligence. That's why social media is so awesome. And so I think just thinking of it in that way, a more positive, helps.
Excellent. And we're going to jump into Q&A now, but if you want to find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, here's my details. And also I'll switch over to our panelist slide so you can see Johnna and Profit's information or names as well. I believe they're both on Twitter, and they are both on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. One question we had come in is, do employers view a private profile as negative? If they search for you and can only see your profile picture, is that bad? I'd echo what Johnna said earlier about LinkedIn. Do not set that as private. If you want to be found by others in your field or recruiters, make your LinkedIn public. Because basically, if it's private, you are not Google searchable. It just really stinks. Johnna, what's your perspective on, like, let's say private Twitter accounts or things like that? I think there's a middle ground there somewhere, but I'm very interested in your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and I go back and forth with a lot of people on this because it does depend on the industry you're in, I think, too. There are some industries that benefit more from a social presence. Sometimes when I see private Twitter accounts, I kind of think like, well, what are you getting out of that? But I do think that if you're using it for personal reasons and personal reasons only, you're not trying to kind of make connections or get a new job. I do understand why you'd be private, on a channel. All of mine are public, but I also I post with that knowledge. I post with that knowledge of I am public on everything. I need to be thoughtful and engaging and just be open to everybody.
Thank you. Another question is, what would your recommendation be for starting an online presence, starting with Facebook or LinkedIn? Just kind of straight up generic professional accounts. I'm definitely an advocate for LinkedIn. It's probably the most unglamorous of social accounts, but it's a workhorse in the long run as far as kind of industry connections and being able to be connected with your professional peers. Profit, from your standpoint, what other platforms would you say are kind of key from maybe if someone's starting out?
My thought would be LinkedIn for sure, if you're just getting your professional sense and connection out there. But one channel that I really like to use, which is, also hit critical mass too, is Instagram. If you're creative or a person in the communications arts, I think what employers are looking for now more than ever are people with a point of view. And if you're able to express whatever kind of art that you have on that platform, and it's something that's well received, and you can basically gain a following of up to 15,000 or more. For example, one of the copywriters I work with at my agency named Jake, he runs a Instagram account called Jake Likes Onions, and it's basically a comedy sketch of like all the cartoons that you see in the Sunday paper, but it's his own spin on his art of what his cartoons look like. And he has been on the front page of Reddit, and he has a really nice following now. So I think whatever inspires you, you definitely can put that out there, but definitely take Johnna's tip on posting with that public knowledge. Platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, I think, can be used to your advantage if you're looking to get discovered in something. But you have to be able to post with that intent in mind.
One of our attendees online is asking about, what about using a pseudonym for personal things online, blogs, etc. Yeah, definitely. If let's say you want to have more of a private Twitter account and not necessarily associated with your name, probably totally fine. Remember about the emails that might be associated with those accounts, because I don't know, depending on the settings, possibly it's possible to see those things. And definitely, yeah, if you have a pseudonym, don't go trolling people. The one thing I will say, like, especially more like with public accounts with either pseudonyms or nicknames or things like that, play around with how you show up in search findings, because I think sometimes, and I've seen this with like titles after names or degrees after names or maiden names or former last names, excuse me, that sometimes that can affect how searchable you are on a certain platform, or sometimes, I don't know if it's still the case with like Twitter, with like if you have an underscore in your name, sometimes that really screws up the ease of being searched on. And especially if you want to be found more easily, maybe don't have those underscores or search characters in there. We have a great tip from Laura online as far as on LinkedIn, as far as like submitting information about birthdays or congratulations, because LinkedIn kind of pushes that out for people to congratulate you. That can sometimes generate more views to your profile. Though the one thing is that also with birthday, it's, it then becomes public knowledge of what day your birthday is. So maybe not right or wrong on that, just take it into consideration.
I love that point.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've all seen it on our anniversaries or our birthdays on LinkedIn. People will automatically use the template that's already put in, that just says, congrats on the new job or happy birthday ! And I only end up looking at the ones that people actually took the time to personalize it. And those are the ones I respond to and that I can like build connections with people on.
Absolutely. Now, Johnna, one of our attendees online said she just visited your LinkedIn profile and saw you didn't include year of college graduation. Has that worked to your advantage or not advantage?
Oh, I love that question. Honestly, I think it has worked to my advantage. I'm somebody that I work with directors and VPs, and for me, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with saying that to them. But I also don't want them to treat me like I'm, a kid. And sometimes when people look at you, it doesn't really matter your age, but they just by looking at you, they just see you as a kid, and you don't want them to treat you like that. And so, especially online when they don't even know you yet, why not take away all of that and set up for your best self?
Yeah,
I think a good point on Johnna's point there that I see in a different window that she kind of opened up for me is if you work for someone that's taking into factor your age and how they treat you, you probably don't want to work for that employer anyway. And then at the same time, a lot of I think jobs are changing. You see a lot of these startups, you see a lot of these organizations that are just being, built and made on the fly, and they're kind of going against the traditional kind of corporate space. So I think to stay ahead of the time, however you decide to use your social media, that could be a resume in itself, right? Or however you try to use technology or a personal website, that in a sense could be the new resume for you. So however someone decides to pick you up, I think that's an entry into good conversation, a good insight into workplace culture, and a good insight into how they engage with their employees. So definitely I think keep that in mind on how you interview and then also are interviewed by prospective companies.
We had one question that I'll field real quick. What if you're not interested in a particular company, but more a particular position? So this is where something like a LinkedIn can be really useful, where I'm just going to pick on Profit right now as far as account supervisor Fallon. So let's just say that's your aspirational position. You'd want to start following or visiting profile pages on LinkedIn of people like Profit. And then that's also the thing with like LinkedIn or Twitter. The more you use those, the more it's going to start serving up algorithms as far as like if you visit anyone's LinkedIn page, often on the right-hand side, it's going to say something like, show me more people like ... So if you come visit my page, it's probably going to spit out a lot more people at the U of M, people who work in higher ed. Probably if you visited Profit's page, going to agency folks. If you visited Johnna's page, it's going to be recruiting and maybe Boston Scientific. So I think that's a way you can really drill down on a specific position and just kind of go down that rabbit hole as far as visiting different pages. The LinkedIn Alumni Finder, if you visit a school's LinkedIn page, click on the Career Insights section, and that brings you to a searchable interface on LinkedIn where you can search by different areas, things like that. Johnna, I do have a question I want to run by you. We had a person online who was asking for any specific advice for women trying to navigate the social media landscape. She notes an article last week about that a woman wrote, where she kind of wrote about the different ways she was treated when she changed her LinkedIn profile from Andrea to Andrew. And and I think it's probably, a good lead into just, I think, maybe some of the biases we have online, or definitely harassment that happens online. So I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that, but that was one question that came up from one of our listeners today.
Yeah, that's a tough thing that I've really had to work hard at my whole professional life, because it's sometimes you want to tell people off, that are being biased in some way online, and as recruiters, you're not allowed to make those judgments, and biases based on gender. So an Andrew versus a Andrea, but people do. And that's unfortunate, but people do. And so usually what I do tell people is, as Profit was kind of saying, that maybe that's not somebody that you want to be working with anyway, if they weren't interested in you as your genuine self. But then the other hand is also just thinking about how you're showing up and having that knowledge of, well, I'm going to give myself the best possible opportunity to get a job. And so if that means that I'm, having my full name instead of my nickname, or coming off more as a more feminine, that's kind of your prerogative, but you kind of have to gauge it in that way.
I think, to go off of Johnna's point, with the whole Golden Globes, were coming off, the Me Too and Time's Up movement, and I think in this day and age, if you look at who you're connected with on LinkedIn, and their content is maybe attracting, more outside sources that are of that kind of male misogynistic culture, you have, and it was kind of hard to find at first, but you can remove those connections on LinkedIn. So you're not seeing any of their content on that page. And then they're also now dropping in degrees of connection. So maybe first degree connection now goes to like a third or fourth. So it gets harder and harder to get in contact with you. And it's unfortunate that stuff like this does happen in our day and age, but when those messages do come in, understand that it's not a character flaw of you, but of that person. So it's quick to just hit a delete and keep it moving with your life. You know what I mean? So yep. That's my advice.
Yeah, and definitely with different platforms, like Profit was saying, with like LinkedIn or Twitter, there are a variety of ways where, like, let's say you're connected with someone, but they're tweeting too much about the restaurants they go to, or things like that. There's ways you can mute messages that come through, or let's say somebody on my LinkedIn just like posted just maybe not offensive stuff, but just kind of more stuff I really wasn't interested in. You can mute those types of things by generally in the upper right hand corner of those contents, there's a drop down where you can say hide this post from appearing again, hide content from Bob, etc., etc. You can really tailor it your way. Last question I'm just going to take is, how do you use LinkedIn to show you're on the job hunt without letting your boss know? There is actually a feature now under, I think it shows up on your own profile screen, but also you can find it through your settings, where you can at least toggle on to supposedly indicate to recruiters that you're available to be contacted. I've toggled that on and off as just practice, just to see, if anything comes up. I guess in higher ed, maybe they don't use it as much. So that's something you could do. Even LinkedIn will say, though, like, they can't guarantee that like someone from your organization wouldn't come across that. Another thing with also like LinkedIn updates, like let's say if you're just doing wholesale changes, you can go into your privacy settings and just say, hey, turn off notifications of when I do profile updates. And so then your network doesn't see that you're doing a wholesale change on your LinkedIn profile. You know, there might be other circumstances like, yeah, you want your LinkedIn network to see that you just started on this, you know, volunteering on this board for this significant nonprofit, or that you added a certain element. So, you know, just stay with what's comfortable for you. We are at 1 o'clock Central, so I just want to give my thanks both to the audience for attending, but both to Profit and Johnna for being with us today. Thank you so much, Johnna.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Profit.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, we are moving into, today's the first day of February, so we have, again, some great webinars coming up. You can visit those at umnalumni.org/virtual. And again, thank you to everyone who takes time to join us today. I think we're well over 160, 170 folks online with us today to talk social media and career. Feel free to ping me. You've got my social. You can find me on the U of M email. Always happy to field any questions. But thank you to our members who help support initiatives like this. And I really do encourage you, if you found value in this and you're interested in Alumni Association membership, visit us at umnalumni.org/membership. This is Jon Ruzek signing off, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.